Washington, D.C.
Is the current activity, which we've been told about, the exchange of fire back and forth in Iran, an indication that that number is going to go up in the months ahead?
Some of that number captures additional O&M, mill pay, and other that would be anticipated through the fiscal year. So some of that anticipates what costs would be going out in the future as well.
So the new number you've given me is what?
$37.5 billion. So
and that represents the cost of the war through what period of time?
Through now for certain aspects of it, but also mill pay, O&M, other anticipated costs through September 30th.
Tonight, the cost of war. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faces a tense day of testimony here on Capitol Hill, pressed by senators over the Pentagon's request for tens of billions of dollars in additional funding for the war with Iran.
And no end in sight. The hearing coming, and it's still underway as the U.S. carries out a 10th consecutive night of strikes against Tehran. The Strait of Hormuz remains restricted, and American casualties continue to rise now with no clear end in sight to this conflict. We'll discuss with lawmakers throughout the hour, Kaylee. This is a pivotal moment once again in the war with Iran as the administration tries to make the argument for more funding just as the president escalates operations.
Yep, we're broadcasting live from Capitol Hill this evening to our TV and radio audiences worldwide here on Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And the hearing with the defense secretary as well as the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, is ongoing right now in the Senate Appropriations Committee, obviously trying to make the case for billions more in funding that Congress may or may not deliver on.
That's true. And that number you heard at the top of our broadcast is the news. $37.5 billion, the number presented by the Secretary of Defense. And joining us now to kick off our coverage this evening is Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who's, of course, chair of the Homeland Security Committee, as well a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. It's great to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for meeting us up here once again. 37.5. I don't know how that number hits you, but if you do a little quick math in your head, we're asking for about 60 and change in the supplemental budget request. Are we signing up for another 10 months of war?
To be fair, I think you're underestimating it. He was clear in his testimony that they also want $1.5 trillion as the base budget.
Well, that's right.
So we currently spend $1 trillion. He wants $1.5 trillion. That's $500 billion increase, plus another, paltry $37 billion on top of the $500 billion. No one in the history of the country has ever asked for this much money. This is more money that you can't even print it that fast. All right, so it threatens our country. The biggest threat we have right now is our debt. We are more in danger of devaluing our currency than we are of Iran invading the United States.
Well, the defense secretary testified that for national security, it is critical that they get the money that they are asking for. What would you say to someone that says the actual danger that the country is put in is if the Pentagon can't fund it?
I would say that he's mistaken the problem. The greatest threat to our national security is our debt. That's what Admiral Mullen said 10 years ago, and it's gotten 10 times worse. It is completely and utterly fiscally irresponsible to someone to ask for a 50% increase in the military, but they're not asking for the approval of Congress. We have a war that we have not voted upon, no congressional vote. Look, George Bush, at the very least, came to Congress. He asked for an authorization for the use of military force for Afghanistan and for Iraq without a vote, and yet then he wants us to give him a 50% increase. We're $2 trillion short this year. Increasing the military spending by 50% is absolutely irresponsible.
So where does that leave the war powers argument? I thought it was interesting that the president sent a letter to Congress announcing the resumption of the war. Doesn't that get a 60-day clock ticking again?
No, the only way it works for the Constitution is the initiation or declaration of war is Congress. The War Powers Act says you can go to war if you're attacked or if you're in imminent danger. The 60-day thing is misinterpreted that you get 60 days to fight the war. No, you're not supposed to fight any war unless you're under imminent attack or that there's a self-defense need to do it. 60 days isn't a gift every time a president says, I want 60 days to start the war. Oh, we stopped yesterday.
Yes.
Oh, we'll start tomorrow. Give us 60 more days. No, the initiation of war, the declaration of war, was given specifically to the legislature. So we're not adhering to the Constitution now. We have an unpopular war, and we have a war that's increasing prices for people already pinched. Look, we've had 25% inflation in the last 5 years. Inflation is cumulative. People don't say, I don't care that I had 9% inflation under Biden. They still lost 9% of the purchasing power. It's all added up. And even with inflation going down, we've had 25% loss of purchasing power in the last 5 years. So people, let's say you make $50,000 and you have 2 kids, you're married and have 2 kids, and if you haven't had a 25% increase in wages, you've lost money in the last 5 years. Add on top of that the gas prices, there are a lot of people being pinched. And I think the elections are going to represent people very unhappy that they aren't getting by as well as they did 5 years ago.
Well, and if the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz may prove critical in at least getting the energy and gasoline costs people are paying down, why not just try to expedite the opening by finishing the job for good in Iran, going as hard militarily as possible, as the president said he's considering?
Do you see us closer or farther away from getting rid of militarization? So let's just make the argument, are we better off now or before the war? So before the war, there had been discussion, but never had been a militarization of the war. People have talked about it for decades, but it never happened. So now the Strait of Hormuz is militarized. So that, I would argue, we're worse off. And people say, well, maybe we're better off because we have more leverage to get them to give up their nuclear weapons. I don't know. I see them dragging their heels and being sly and clever with this, and knowing that we're probably not going to put troops in there. If you really want to control the Straits of Hormuz, you would have to send a couple 100,000 troops in. I don't think the president's inclined to do that. I think the Iranians know that. I still hope for the best, and the best would be open the Strait of Hormuz and then maybe get them to trade sanctions relief for removal of enriched uranium. But I don't think we're closer to that. I think we're actually farther away. And if you tell me, oh, well, we just need more bombs, we bombed the crap out of them. We have completely and utterly annihilated. We defeated them completely. But they just don't care. And you bomb them some more and you think they're going to. My favorite one is this, though. They say, well, the new guys are a lot easier to work with. And it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, you mean the guy whose dad you killed and you blew his leg off and disfigured him and you called him insulting things all the time? Oh, he's going to be much more inclined to sue for peace? No, they're more inclined to battle to the end.
Yeah.
And they know if they allow too much to happen that the regime could be toppled. So I think they will fight to the bitter end.
So what's the course of action with everything that you just said? If there's going to be a deal that trades sanctions relief, do we start drawing down our presence? Do we start bringing men and women home? They've been hanging out there for 5 months, even more than that, Senator. When do Americans see their families again?
So I think the military defeat hasn't gotten us closer to a deal. To get a deal, you have to give something. So the trade is this. We would have to trade sanctions relief for removal of the enriched uranium.
Okay.
And you could argue that we're in a better position maybe to get that because we've shown our military might. I'm hopeful but not certain that that's where we are. Mm-hmm. But that's a trade worth happening. But realize there are many hawks in my party who don't want any deal with the regime. We don't trust these scoundrels. We're never dealing with them.
Right.
But if that's our attitude, then we've got a whole lot more chaotic news for the world markets.
Well, speaking of making deals, there's plenty of deal making happening here on Capitol Hill to try to get the president as much of what he desires as possible when it comes to the Save America Act. It seems that it's going to be folded, at least in part, into this budget resolution to pave the way for Reconciliation 3.0. Is that effort to try to get the Save America Act passed hampering progress on other issues? Because the votes aren't here in the Senate. The math doesn't work that way.
I'm for people showing an ID and showing that they're a citizen, but it doesn't have the votes to pass. What they're actually talking about now is not the SAVE Act. They're talking about starting a new federal program
with grants,
$10 billion, and they're going to pay people to adhere to it. But you've seen the government of California. You think they're going to take money to do what Republicans tell them to do? I think no way. And then some of the battleground states, they already do this. People need to realize that in Arkansas, in Arizona, which is a battleground state every year presidentially, and maybe for the Senate, you already have to have proof of citizenship to register to vote. In some states, they looked at this. In Utah, they looked at 2 million voters, and they found one person who wasn't a citizen. So I'm all for checking to see if people are citizens. In Kentucky, we've already policed our rolls. We don't need any money from the federal government. And creating a new federal program, I mean, it was Reagan who said the closest thing to immortality is a federal program. We don't need more federal programs. So I think we should try to fight some of this on a state-by-state basis, try to get rid of unsolicited mail-in ballots, and try to get rid of harvesting as statewide initiatives. I think those would be maybe a more realistic way of getting some of this done to get to a more valid election.
You mentioned some of the hawks in your party, and I immediately think of the late Senator Lindsey Graham. I think as well about Senator Mitch McConnell, who is a vocal advocate as a hawk when it comes to Ukraine as well.
Right.
How is he doing? Are you hearing from constituents about his well-being, and have you spoken with the senator?
I haven't spoken to him directly. I've seen what the news reports are, and I hope that he gets better and is back soon. But you're right. These are people now advocating for a new sanctions bill on Russia.
That's right, yeah.
In memory of Lindsey Graham. But this new sanctions bill has 100% tariffs on the top 5 recipients of Russian oil. It'd be 100% tariff on China, 100% tariff on India, 100% tariff on Turkey. It would be more disastrous to the world economy than the Smalley Hoot tariffs in the 1930s. It's a terrible, terrible, rotten bill. Probably the worst thing I could have seen in a decade in Washington. And everybody's glomming onto it's like, oh, Russia's bad, Ukraine good. But you know what? You're going to devastate the world's economy. It also gives the president the authority the Supreme Court took away from him and said he didn't have. It's going to give wide, vast tariff authority to the executive branch, and I think that's a huge mistake. It's a $500 billion tax increase.
Wow.
We do $500 billion worth of trade with China, India, and a handful of other countries. If you put 100% tariff on them, and if they were to pay it, it's a $500 billion tax increase.
The president says he wants to add Iran
to the economy.
Add Iran and Hezbollah, he said.
Say again?
The president wants to add Iran to
sanctions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, you know how many sanctions we have on Russia? 26,000. Do you know how many behaviors Russia has changed since we put 26,000 tariffs on them?
Yeah.
So what's
Zero.
the better way, Senator? How do you put pressure on Russia?
Well, I think you shouldn't be advocating for Ukraine to be in NATO. 2, you shouldn't threaten to steal their money. We have confiscated about $250 billion of theirs in foreign trade accounts. Senator Graham wanted to give it to Ukraine. That would be a recipe for an eternal war. You think Russia's going to quit the war if you take their money and give it to the people they're fighting with? It doesn't make Russia right in any of this. Russia's the aggressor. I agree with all of that. Sympathies are with Ukraine. But adamantly stomping our feet and slapping our shoe and saying they must be in NATO is a mistake. The same people who pushed for Ukraine to be in NATO want Georgia to be in NATO. It's
Is there
a
even
recipe
still
for
a live
war.
conversation about Ukraine being in NATO? The European Union, certainly, but they're not still advocating for their own membership, at least at this time.
They've advocated for a decade. And if you still talk to the EU, they'll say everyone has the right to be in NATO. That is a stupid alliance if everybody has the right to be in it. Many of these people had nothing to do with the original reason we had NATO. But Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union at one point. Georgia was too. I'm glad they have independent countries now, but we never can imagine things in reverse. What if Mexico were in the Warsaw Pact in 1965 or wanted to join the Warsaw Pact? We would have gone to war for that.
Yeah.
And yet we don't quite understand why Russia's at war when we agitate to put Ukraine, a former part of the Soviet Union, into a military alliance against Russia. So I think it was a huge mistake, and I think that the elections went back and forth in Ukraine for decades. There'd be a pro-Russian, then a pro-West, and then pro-Russian and pro-West. And what we did didn't work, and it led to war. And I hope we won't repeat the same thing with Georgia.
I wonder how many people remember the Warsaw Pact at this point. Senator, lastly, you subpoenaed Dr. Anthony Fauci, who I believe is going to appear before your committee next week.
Yes.
As you try to challenge him on the roots of COVID. How does that exploration, that conversation next week, help to prevent the next pandemic?
I think it's important to know what mistakes we made. It was one of the worst medical decisions in our history for Anthony Fauci to approve dangerous gain-of-function research in communist China. It's an opaque society. It's a society that often doesn't tell the truth about many things, and they weren't honest about it. At first they said, oh, it's not even being transmitted human to human, when it was all over Wuhan. They were just being dishonest with us. But this gain-of-function research, where you create a virus that gains transmissibility and gains the virulence or pathogenicity, is a bad idea. And there are people doing it with the avian flu. There are people wanting to do it with Ebola. This is the type of research we shouldn't fund here, but we really shouldn't fund it in an opaque society that we really don't trust in many fronts.
All right. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, thank you so much for joining us live on Capitol Hill tonight. Meantime, chipmakers are gathering pace once again, poised for their biggest monthly gain in a month, as we saw today, and brought the rest of the markets along with them. Let's turn now for more to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York. Nora.
Well, a risk-on day on Wall Street. We did see green across the screen as it looks for major indexes, at least. A lot of that pushed forward by gains in chip makers. We did see a lot of gains there, but the Nasdaq 100, which we know is a tech-heavy index, higher by 1.9%. The S&P 500 higher by just less than 1% on the day, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by 0.7%. But what we saw was tech and energy, the best performing sectors in the S&P 500. No surprise, given the fact that we did see oil pushing higher, especially as we continue to monitor the geopolitics in the Middle East. We did see oil moving higher, so that, of course, is pushing the energy sector in the S&P 500 higher as well. But we did also get some earnings out after the closing bell, at least some preliminary results from Supermicro. We saw Supermicro Computers rising for double-digit gains in the after-hours trade. This is after its order backlog rose to a record in excess of $60 billion. And we continue to see this trend of tech doing pretty well. If we looked at today on the scope there, we did see the SOX, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, rising by more than 5%. Now, this comes after just last week when we saw a sell-off for that index. So a rebound on the day with the SOX index on pace for its best month since 2022, recouping a lot of last week's losses after we did see chip makers actually sinking into the bear market, down more than 20% from their June high. So we're seeing a bit of activity as investors dive back into tech today.
Nora, thank you so much. Live from New York, Bloomberg's Nora Melinda. We're live on Capitol Hill, and coming up, we're going to bring you to the White House as well for the president's meeting with the president of Lebanon and what he is now threatening against Iran. This is Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
In this vote, the yeas are 214, the nays are 211. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Capitol Hill. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And that was the sound on the House floor a short time ago, passing the rule for the Defense Authorization Act, as well as a slew of other bills, including a continuing resolution to fund the government and, of course, a budget resolution to pave the way for Reconciliation 3.0. That rule, of course, was passing just as Defense Secretary Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dan Kane appeared in the Senate to testify before the Appropriations Committee. And joining us now for more here on Capitol Hill is Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. So, Erik, there was a real question as to whether or not the rule, the procedural part, could even get done today, because there's always the risk of some members of the Republican conference going rogue. That did not happen. Now the question is, are the votes there to actually get these things through in final passage?
Right. It was a bit of a nail-biter. It was tied 211 to 211 for a while as the Speaker and his team tried to woo these conservatives who were holding out. The Speaker has faced a blockade for weeks over the Save America Act, this voter ID measure that they want to see rammed through the Senate. But finally, they got some assurances, and that was able to go forward. The main vote later that's going to happen today is the continuing resolution to prevent an October 1st government shutdown, to keep the government open through December 4th. It's not attached to any voter ID or other measure, but still Democrats are going to oppose it. They say there's a loophole in there that would allow ICE to be funded, get even more funding than the $70 billion they got earlier this summer. So it's going to be another close vote for Speaker Johnson. I'm predicting it does go forward, but it's not ready for prime time in the Senate. The White House even set up 11 pages of requests it wants, including for a new battleship related to the Trump administration's vision for the Navy, and that's not even in the bill. So it's going to be changed in the Senate. This also sets up this $95 billion Iran war budget, and that's actually dicier. I talked to Kevin Kiley, the Independent. He's against it, says he wants some kind of guardrails on how the Iran war is being conducted. So that's going to be a much tougher vote. We're expecting that tomorrow.
There are questions about pay-fors as well, of which I don't believe there are any offsets to pay for this war spending. Erik, does the Senate pick this up after recess, or could all of this be done before everyone goes home?
Yeah, it's a real conundrum for the Senate. You talk to people like Roger Wicker. He wants the $350 billion that the Pentagon asked for as part of this. You talk to other people like Ron Johnson. They want to see pay-fors. They're worried about the debt. Rand Paul earlier on this show indicating his worries about the debt. That leaves a sort of a stalemate among Senate Republicans. You talk to John Thune, he says it's no easy task, heavy lift. Every signal I get from him in the hallway, this is going nowhere fast. I think it's more of a December lame duck issue.
Got it. Erik, thanks for being with us. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson spending time with us on Capitol Hill. Meantime, at the White House, the president welcomed Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, the two leaders holding a bilateral meeting, and opened the session to reporters as they took questions on everything from the war with Iran to Canadian tariffs and more than that. Bloomberg's Jen Dlouhy was, in fact, in the room for all of it and joins us right now live from the White House. Jen, the president speaking following the 10th straight night of attacks on Iran. How does this escalation play with what you heard in the Oval Office today?
Well, we obviously heard a lot of discussion from the president about Iran and about, the possibility of immediate talks with Iran, which he minimized. But, the focus was, of course, on the Lebanese president and, the efforts to implement a U.S.-mediated ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. The president and President Trump and President Aoun spoke about economic cooperation and efforts to rein in Hezbollah militants in the southern part of the country. Trump, promised U.S. help in the Oval Office. He wasn't specific at that point, but hours later, he did come out with a pretty significant announcement. He said he was directing his administration to let U.S. airline carriers fly directly into Lebanon, decades after that route was first suspended. So that suggests a possible easing of travel restrictions that could obviously help give a boost to Lebanon's economy. And one thing to note is just that, Lebanon came into today's meeting. They were hoping for a withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern stretches of the country. Trump did not publicly announce any kind of timeline for that shift. And later, a White House advisor for Arab and Middle Eastern affairs told reporters that the changes under the current framework are being implemented gradually.
Jen, you, of course, also asked the president about his announcement last night to slap 50% tariffs on Canada. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
On your tariffs last night, the Canada tariffs, what are those a response to the wildfires in Canada?
No, that's separate. We're looking at that separately.
And what is there anything Canada
It's only
can do?
response to the way they've treated our farmers and our people. Yeah, Canada's been very, very tough on us over the years, for many years, and no other president's done anything about it.
Jen, they're looking at it separately for tariffs related to the wildfires. What authority could he use to do something like that?
That's the real big question here. I mean, the president was reiterating that these new 50% tariffs are about what the U.S. says is unfair treatment of American goods, notably dairy, alcohol, and cars. But one of the challenges for the administration is how to follow through on the president's threat last week of higher tariffs to punish Canada for these wildfires and the wildfire smoke. It's not clear that there is an abundance of good legal tools for that. Obviously, the president has seen his tariff agenda challenged in the courts on multiple fronts and is still grappling with how to resurrect many of the initial tariffs that he put in place. We sense and expect a lot of activity on that front later this week as the administration seeks to avoid any kind of gap in tariffs with a number of them set to expire on Friday.
All right. Bloomberg's Jen Dlouhy reporting from the White House this evening. Thank you so much. And still ahead, we'll hear from the senior senator of Florida for more on today's defense hearing and what's next in the war with Iran. Republican Senator Rick Scott will join us just ahead, live from Capitol Hill on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, live from Capitol Hill this evening. The third U.S. soldier who was killed in combat this weekend when he attempted to disarm an Iranian drone has now been identified. The U.S. military today saying it was 30-year-old Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton of Fayetteville, North Carolina, who was killed. Sergeant Swinton joins 16 other military personnel who have been killed since the war with Iran began more than 140 days ago. Here on Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was pressed about how the administration can square the new round of strikes on Iran after declaring that the U.S. had destroyed Iran's capabilities earlier this year.
How is it possible, if their capabilities were, quote, functionally destroyed 3 months earlier, as she claimed, for them to be doing this now?
Well, Senator, Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been in the past decade.
Joining us now for more is Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida, a member of the Senate Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Foreign Affairs Committees, also a veteran himself. Senator, thank you so much for being here live with us on Capitol Hill this evening. When we consider we're coming off of 10 consecutive days of the U.S. striking Iran anew and the president repeatedly threatening to go harder, to consider heavier options, to use his language to try to finally bring the regime to heel, is that the only course forward, is just to intensify a campaign that has killed so many Americans already?
Well, first thing, your heart goes out to the families that lost their loved ones. I was fortunate to be able to serve in the U.S. Navy, but never got shot at. So my heart goes out to the families that lost loved ones. Nobody wants that. You know, unfortunately, Iran's been killing Americans for 47 years. We finally have the president that said enough's enough. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They're not going to have the ability to continue to kill Americans. Unfortunately, it's going to continue to take military effort to do it. The Iranian regime is not ready for change, so it's probably going to take a lot more bombing to get it done. But if we don't, then we're all at risk. None of us want to be killed by a nuclear weapon, so I mean, it's war is terrible.
If a lot more bombing must be done, there's a question about how much it might cost, and that was a big part of the conversation today with the defense secretary. He had a number for us today, $37.5 billion. Knowing this supplemental request is about twice that, what is the administration girding for? Beyond replenishing supplies, will there be much more money required to continue this operation?
Well, we don't know. The bottom line is we don't know. We don't know when the Iranian regime is going to come around to decide they don't want to continue to kill Americans.
Well, then should this be paid for if this is going to be a longer haul?
Well, I think, I believe everything ought to be paid for. I don't think this government should, any government should be running deficits. And so I've been frustrated up here because we're running $2 trillion deficits right now. So I think things have to be paid for if we want to get inflation under control.
Right.
And nobody wants their taxes to go up. But it's a trade-off, right? Nobody wants to go to war, but we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon to kill us. I've got kids and I've got grandkids, and I don't want them to kill a nuclear weapon, or I'm sure you're in the same position. You want your family killed by a nuclear weapon. So it's going to cost us money. It's going to cost to have a strong military to be able to stop this. And let's look at the world right now. The world's dangerous. The world's dangerous you can blame anybody you want to blame, but the government of Russia hates us. The government of China hates us. The government of Iran hates us. The government of North Korea hates us. So it's a dangerous place. And so if we don't build up a military that can defend our freedom, then we're going to lose it. And so, unfortunately, it costs money.
Yeah.
Well, should there not be answers as to how much ultimately this is going to cost? Do you feel that the Pentagon has been transparent enough with that information? The defense secretary only revealed that today, giving sworn testimony before the appropriations committee.
Well, I think it would be easy if we knew how many more days it was going to take. We don't. I mean, we don't know how many more days it's going to take to get a new regime and to destroy them and bring them to the table. We just don't. And we actually, you never have enough information about how well your enemy is doing. So I look at Pete Hegseth has been always open and honest with me. If I call him or if I text him, I get an answer within hours. He's very transparent with me. He's been very transparent with the Armed Services Committee. But I don't think we know yet. I mean, I wish I knew. I wish it was tonight. I wish they would come to their senses, because I don't want more American lives lost, and I don't want to be at war. But I don't want them to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, so with all of that said, do you buy talk of a 10-day ceasefire that we've been hearing about recently, or is that a waste of time? How do you trust this party with a ceasefire?
I mean, we tried. I mean, we gave them the chance of a diplomacy. Okay, they used it to rearm, basically. Yeah. And they were never serious. So they're a bunch of liars. They want to kill us. So
if we want to get serious, do we bomb Pickaxe Mountain and do we seize Kharg Island?
So, I mean, that's a decision the president gets to make.
Understood.
The way I look at it is look, we have to do everything. I mean, nothing should be off the table. Yeah, we don't want to be at war, and we don't want Americans killed. So whatever it's going to take, because they want to kill us. Whether we like it or not, we'd love to have diplomacy, we don't want to be at war, they want to kill us. So if somebody wants to kill you, I want to make sure they don't.
Well, you mentioned that the Iranian regime, to use your language, hates the United States. You mentioned Russia as well. Obviously, there is some renewed momentum behind a sanctions bill that would intensify the pressure on Russia via giving the president authority to implement secondary tariffs on buyers of Russian energy products. Is that going to pass?
I think
in the Senate under what timeline?
It should. I think. Well, I think it'll pass before we go on recess.
Okay, so within the next week.
I mean, look. Putin's despicable. You look at the women and children he's killed in Ukraine. I mean, he's a despicable human being. And anybody that wants to support him by buying the oil, his oil is doing the wrong thing, and they ought to be held accountable. I mean, the world would like to be. None of us want to be at war. The world would like to be at peace. Maybe people like Putin and Xi and the Ayatollah don't. But so it's going to take. We all have to be in this together. So stop helping these thugs. These are thugs. They're killing their own citizens. They don't care about their own citizens. Look at Putin. How many people in Russia have died because of what he's done? Yeah. I mean, how does he wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, "I've really done the right thing"? No. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands from what you read.
Yeah, it's remarkable, the loss.
It's remarkable.
On both sides here, Senator. These are just a couple of the items you could be voting on with your week and change left before the August recess. There's also a continuing resolution that we haven't had a chance to ask you about. Is that a smart move right now? Looks like the votes are there in the House to pass this and avoid what could be a shutdown at the end of September.
We have to do it.
You have to.
I mean, we can't have a government shutdown.
So regular order is not going to fly this time.
I mean, the Democrats have walked away from it. We finally got the list of anomalies to be able to put together a continuing resolution. I hope the Democrats vote for it. So we'll see. But we need to vote on that to try to make sure we don't have a government shutdown. It's horrible for the people. I mean, think about it. I mean, the Democrats have shut down the government 3 times. These are people that work their butts off up here. They're federal workers and they're all over the country and they don't get paid. Some of them didn't get paid for weeks and weeks and weeks. They have mortgages. They have groceries. They have kids' camp, all this stuff, and they're not getting paid. That's wrong.
Well, your leader, Senator Thune, has suggested the CR could ultimately get attached to the third budget reconciliation package if the votes aren't there with Democrats. Basically do this along partisan lines. What precedent would that set?
Look, we've already gotten rid of the filibuster. Now, just remember, the filibuster is supposed to be only to stop debate, not to stop bills. But we've already gotten rid of the filibuster for noms. We've already gotten the filibuster for judges, right? So the only thing left is for bills. And so it's when we say reconciliation, that means you can do it with just your party votes.
Right.
That's basically getting rid of the filibuster. Mm-hmm. So my view is just get rid of it. Let's get rid of it and pass the stuff. We care about election security. We care about funding the government. There's so many things we care about. Let's get them done.
Well, Senator Thune has stood by the filibuster. He has previously publicly said he's not willing to kill it. You're saying he effectively would be if he chooses that course of action.
Well, it's a way to get around it, right? And it's only for budgetary items. But let's be honest. There's not a lot left. It's only bills because we're using reconciliation, which we don't have a filibuster rule for that. We've already gotten rid of for nominations. We've already gotten rid of for judges. So there's not much left.
I'm going to just mention for the benefit of our radio listeners that we're talking to Senator Scott here in the rotunda of the Russell Senate office building, which is why you're hearing all this echo. And he's wearing a lapel pin that says one word, jobs. I have to ask you, we've been talking about not only jobs every day, but data centers every day. Byron Donalds, the congressman from your state, talked to us about his plan, not for a moratorium, but to control power off the grid and keep water, for instance, in a closed circuit on site. That's a different attack than New York, which put in place a year-long moratorium. As somebody who has background in tech, you're wearing the jobs pin. What's the right answer? And should Florida be welcoming data centers under that construct?
Well, so when I ran for governor back in 2010, the state had lost 832,000 jobs. I'm a business guy. I built businesses all my life. I grew up in public housing. I watched my parents struggle for work. So jobs is the most important thing we can do for any family. So right now, we need more jobs. My state is hurting with jobs right now. We need to get the cost of living down, and the only way that's going to happen is balance the budget. Now, with regard to data centers, what we've got to do is we cannot allow data centers to cause electricity prices to go up. That is not fair. It hurts the poorest families. If you're rich, none of this stuff hurts you. On top of that, we've got to preserve all of our water. Water is important in my state. We're going to preserve all the water in my state.
Okay. great to spend time with you in person. Meet us up here again when you're back in town. Fantastic. Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida. We thank you, as always, for being with us on Bloomberg. Joining us now, our political panel, Democratic strategist Adam Hodge, the managing director at Bully Pulpit International, alongside Republican strategist Katie Frost, former executive director of the Georgia Freedom Caucus. It's great to see you both. I wish we were all in the same room, but we're going to do this anyway because we've been talking about some pretty important stuff tonight. And Adam, I'm going to start with you as a former spokesperson for the NSC and the Biden administration. What is your thought on this budget request that Pete Hegseth was arguing for today, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, an additional $70+ billion on top of the $1.5 trillion they're asking for on an annual basis. What does this tell you about what the administration's planning for?
Look, Joe, when I was in the Biden administration, when we had cabinet secretaries go up for their budget hearings, you always went forward with enough information that there were no surprises for members of Congress. And today, multiple times where Pete Hegseth surprised the appropriators by saying, oh, we have this extra $70 billion that we haven't even spent yet, and oh, we may spend it in the next 6 weeks. That rubbed a lot of senators wrong today, and I think it speaks to some of the mixed messages and the lack of strategy you've heard from the secretary. He did not explain what this money is actually going to solve, what the goals of this war now are. And we know that today $70 billion Americans have spent more in gas. We know that they're spending billions and more on fertilizer just to keep farms running. And so the American people are paying a huge cost for this war, and you do not get a clear idea of what the money is actually for. And that was a missed opportunity for Secretary Hegseth.
Well, and Katie, as the former executive director of the Georgia Freedom Caucus, as Joe mentioned, I would imagine that you would consider yourself to be a fiscal conservative. No? Should the Pentagon continue to get all the checks it asks for cashed, even if there's not public justification necessarily?
Well, it's a very important balance you have to strike when you're in a position like this, because, yes, we need to explain to the appropriators what the plans are. But at the same time, we cannot reveal too much on national television that might tip off our enemies around the world that are watching this as to what our actual strategy is going to be. So you have to be as specifically vague is how I would describe that. But, you know, it's fascinating to see how when the request comes through, all of a sudden, maybe people start caring about money in Washington because, it's not like you said, I worked for the Georgia Freedom Caucus, know a lot of folks in the Freedom Caucus here in Washington. And like many people, I grew up watching West Wing. That's what I loved about politics. And I'm reminded of a quote from Josh Lyman where he said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Soon enough, it becomes real money. So $70 billion, that is a big check. But here's the question. President Trump ran for president on the platform of peace through strength. That is what he emphasized time and time again. But no one discusses what is a price tag on peace through strength. We've never actually seen that, and now we got the first example of that from Secretary Hegseth today.
We sure did. $37.5 billion was the number that he provided to Dick Durbin, Adam, when he asked what is the up-to-date price tag, 5 months of war, and he said that included mill pay going through September 30th. If the administration is asking for twice that, I've posed this question to a couple of the senators here this evening, are we then girding for 10 more months of war?
I think 10 more months is the short end. The fundamentals in this region have changed, and there's no going back. Iran now knows that they can control the Strait of Hormuz whenever they want to. That is going to lead to higher oil prices, higher fertilizer prices, higher prices on commodities across the board. Combined with now we're seeing another front opening in the Red Sea with the Houthis now launching missiles and strikes at boats over there. So this region has fundamentally changed. The economics of all of this have fundamentally changed, and it's going to mean higher prices for Americans across the board, no matter what. And I think the thing that the White House needs to do is just level with the American people. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what's gone right. This is what's gone wrong. This is what we are now trying to get done and how we're going to end this conflict. But right now, you get nothing. It's just a bunch of status quo. And the American people are going to keep paying more at the pump and more in the grocery store. And that's a problem for the president politically.
Well, yeah, because the American people will head to the polls in November for the midterms. Katie, if this is not wrapped, truly wrapped by November, what problem does that create for the Republican Party?
Well, historically speaking, the party that is controlling the White House always has a bad night in the first midterm. Only twice in the last 100 years have you seen the party that is in power in the White House gain seats in the midterm elections. So that obviously the fundamentals there are favoring the Democratic Party. But what I would say is the Democrats have not presented an alternative, and that is what's going to be difficult for them. If they are going to run on the economy, they say, all right, we don't like what's going on now. But the question they fail to answer is, what are you going to do that's different? Under President Biden, the economy was disastrous. Inflation was at record levels. And then they look at that and they say, well, if I was in a car that crashed with a drunk driver, why would I get in a car with them again? The Democrats have not been able to answer that question for the American people. And if we are going to be able to focusing on domestic issues, I think that you're going to see a good night for President Trump.
All right, Katie Frost and Adam Hodge, our political panel this evening. Thank you both so much for joining us. And still ahead, the president teases an attack on Iran as his own military brass testifies on the Hill, as we've been discussing. We'll speak to the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner, about that and more up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It doesn't mean anything unless they have the material. You're talking about the centrifuges. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything unless they have the material. They don't have. We follow the material. That's where the action is, and we'll be hitting that area probably pretty soon. And there's not a thing they can do about it. Normally I wouldn't say that. If I thought they could do something about it, I would never say that. But we'll be hitting that area pretty soon, and very heavily.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kayleigh Lines, live on Capitol Hill. The president there in Washington here taking questions from the White House press corps in the Oval Office, threatening action against Iran after reports the Iranian regime relocated nuclear centrifuges into Pickaxe Mountain to evade strikes. Of course, he is now promising to strike if, in fact, that is what's called for. Joining us now to talk about the ongoing war, the big debate over funding that's happening today on Capitol Hill, is the Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who's vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a member as well of the Senate Finance Committee. It's great to see you, Senator, and welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We've got a lot of questions for you, and we may as well start with funding for the war, as Pete Hegseth continues to make the argument in this Appropriations Committee hearing. $37.5 billion was the price tag he offered for operations so far, but of course the administration is asking for a lot more. When you consider the vote on this supplemental budget request and the number of active duties troops in your state, the number of defense contractors, your voice is pretty important here. Are you a yes or a no?
At this point, Joe, I'm a no, because the Defense Department still has roughly $85 billion of unspent money. I agree that we have, taken down our stocks of munitions. They need to be replenished. Yeah. Taken it out of already appropriated money. This was a war of choice. And the irony is, to start a war of choice without a plan, or a plan that we were going to bomb Iran into submission. The four goals that the administration laid out: regime change, how's that going? The current crowd is worse. Enriched uranium, we haven't gotten it out. It would take 15,000 troops on the ground. Getting rid of their missiles and drones, obviously not the case. In Strait of Hormuz, seems to me, with gas now back to $4 and diesel above $5, that's not working out as well. This was a war of choice. The president never made the case to the American people. It's dreadfully unpopular. We want to replenish those troops, and I do. Take it from the funds that have already been appropriated, that are sitting in basically the budget at DOD.
Well, of course, DOD is asking for even more in the next fiscal year budget, $1.5 trillion. There is a question as to whether or not that regular appropriations process will be completed. Most often, Senator, we hear it will not be, hence a continuing resolution that is going to be voted on in the House tonight and will reach your chamber shortly thereafter. Are you willing to cast that vote now to fund the government through December?
I would rather see if we, it feels like throwing in the towel now when we've got weeks left before September 30th.
So that's a no?
Well, I've not looked, is it a clean CR? Is it not a clean CR? I got enough on my plate right now. I've not focused on this yet. If it comes over, I'll take a good solid look. But, the thing that I worry, because I do think there are some changes at the Department of Defense that are really important. They're trying to move to multi-year contract. They're trying to see if we can squeeze more resources out. I mean, the Deputy Secretary, Steve Feinberg, who's a business guy I have a lot of respect for, but you can't ask the Democrats to write a blank check when they haven't said, okay, usually there's a ratio between defense spending and domestic spending. They don't even want to talk about that yet. You can't, as in my state, we get through the election, and if the big ugly bill law is actually implemented, we'll throw 300,000 Virginians off of health care coverage from Medicaid. And I'm supposed to then almost double the defense budget when we're taking health care away so dramatically. This is not the way things ought to operate. And frankly, the administration on some of these one-time items, I don't think has really fully made the case.
It says a lot about where we are when you're still looking for a top line and the leadership wants to vote on a CR before August recess because we can't get anything done. But you're right. You have a lot on your plate right now. And I'm wondering how you feel about the president's pick. I think I know to some extent to be the next DNI. Should Jay Clayton have that job and then you get on to renewing FISA?
Listen, I know Jay Clayton. I like Jay Clayton. I worked with him well when he was head of the SEC. But I was bitterly disappointed when he came before the committee and couldn't even say who was elected president in 2020 or when he...
We played the tape that day.
He didn't appreciate, or he didn't... I also was almost as much kind of straightening my credibility that he wasn't fully familiar with what Tulsi Gabbard had done in intervening in the obsession Trump has about losing the 2020 election and grabbing those voter files. And I just felt like I can't in good conscience say, you've earned my vote. I voted against him today. But I will also quickly say, if he's going to get confirmed, I'd like him to get confirmed quickly because, what we do know, at least in my view, who is a disaster is Bill Pulte, the acting director, who has no national security background at all, and his only, in my mind, qualification for the job was in his job as overseeing Fannie and Freddie in the housing markets, he was willing to take private mortgage information and politically weaponize it. What could go wrong if he's in charge of all 18 of our intelligence agencies?
You mentioned 2020. Of course, the president gave a primetime speech last week in which he alleged Chinese interference in the 2020 election. You're vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, and I wonder if you have seen intelligence yourself to the extent you're able to confirm or deny to us that suggested or that could be active in 2026.
I was embarrassed by the president the other night. Not as a senator, not as a Democrat. I was embarrassed that the president of the United States would ask for this much time and go forward with a bunch of lies. Most responsible networks didn't even treat it as news. And you've already seen, I mean, the hypocrisy of this guy is jaw-dropping. He's saying China does all this, and yet today he was asked about China. Oh, no, they're better now. He can't even maintain the same story for 5 days. I think the speech was a disaster. I think we did a good job at pre-bunking it. I can assure you, the intelligence community, all 18 agencies, and the irony is, of course, who was in charge of the 2020 election? Donald Trump. It was his intelligence community. He was the president. They came back with a consensus view that all countries tried to influence, China, Russia, Iran, Russia the most on behalf of Trump. But you never know whether the influence social media campaigns work or not. But no one interfered and changed a single vote. And then, again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but the idea that, oh my gosh, China's got a hold of our voter files. They're public information. Every country, friend and foe, I'm sure buys up the data of our voter files. And to act like that is a great reveal, was insane. So, I do appreciate that, and one of the things I've been trying to do is get former members of the intel community, military, to speak the truth. So it's not just coming from a partisan lens.
The rabbit hole goes pretty deep sometimes, Senator. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you about your state being home to Data Center Alley, and you're out with an important bill to regulate the development of AI. There's been so much conversation about regulating development of data center. How about the technology itself?
Well, Joe, I'm obsessed about AI. I think it can bring great positive, but there's also a lot of downside. And so this is not a single bill. And by no means do I think all of my answers are the perfect ones. But if we don't move quickly, all of the innovation could be squashed because of, frankly, fear from the American people from both the left and the right. So on data centers, I think there ought to be minimum federal standards around power usage, water usage, setback from communities, backup power, making sure communities know. And I don't think the companies should get full accelerated depreciation until they meet those standards. Okay. I think I think most of us would agree who had kids, social media, we should have put some guardrails on. Mm-hmm. Social media is nothing compared to the ability what AI can have to influence kids. Chatbots that encourage suicide, non-consensual nudes. We got to have, and there's some bipartisan efforts here as well, we ought to have some rules about at least not having the government buy some of the systems that would allow that. I also lay out, I think I'm one of the first people to lay out at least a framework of what duty of care ought to be around agentic AI agents. They are going to be more and more the way we interact with the markets, with the finance system. Let's have some standard of care. I know our clock's ticking. Yeah. I think we also, in terms of, with Mythos coming out, the Anthropic model, and there have been 4 more models since then, this raises huge national security concerns. And I think even the administration is realizing we've got to have some level of pre-testing. I believe it needs to be mandatory before we put these out in the wild. And then finally, I even believe there will be AI jobs created, but we could have a 5-year gap. And unlike last transformations, it won't hit the low-skill jobs. I think it's going to hit our college graduates. I will come back on air and pay the bet. I think we could hit 30% recent college graduate unemployment in the next 2 years. And we don't even really know. The best idea I may have heard is take a third of the business majors and turn them into healthcare workers. But we're going to need big ideas here in transformation.
We've got to do more on this. Thank you, Senator. Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, we thank you and thanks for being with us. We're live on Capitol Hill, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.